We're back. You are chatting with John P. Today, we are going to be talking about the top questions that we receive as watch dealers. Now, it might be different from dealer to dealer or from business to business, but I've compiled a list of the top questions that we get asked all of the time. Now, some of these questions you might think are no-brainers, but some of them maybe not so much. And so I'm going to answer these questions here and also kind of how that train of thought really plays out to kind of share with you a little bit more of what we do behind the scenes at DelReyWatch.com. And if you are familiar with us, what we do is we buy, sell, trade pre-owned watches and unworn watches on occasion, and we are technically open, albeit the staff is working remotely from home and orders are being processed and sent out at least one day per week while we're able to, in this effort to kind of shift things around and really accommodate the new mandates from the government in terms of staying home and everything like that. So I have the list right here. We are going to run through it. Oh, by the way, Explorer 2 16550 Rolex transitional model on the wrist. Love this thing. The first question that we always receive is, I would like this watch or I would like that watch. Now let me explain what I mean by this. We will receive a lot of emails from people that will say, should I get the Omega Seamaster or should I get the Rolex Submariner? Should I get a Blancpain 50 Fathoms or should I get a Squale something or other? We get so many questions about whether or not someone should get this watch or that watch. And it's always 2 or 3 different watches, and sometimes they're similar, right? They might be dive watches, or it might be a chronograph and a tourbillon, or something that is so different that it would be so difficult to even answer that. And so the response is almost always that you have to go with what you really want. You know, I can tell you some positives to having an Omega, in my opinion, as well as some positives to having a Rolex, in my opinion, and some negatives for those brands or models. But the thing is, everything in life has upsides, downsides, and a lot of this is just pure aesthetic and what you think. Nowadays, modern watches, they're very comparable in terms of specs, right? You get a Rolex Submariner, it's going to be comparable, regardless of who tells you what, to a modern Omega Seamaster. Very comparable. There's going to be some subtle differences, but they're subtle. So it really comes down, in my opinion, to your opinion. Buy what you like and you'll be happy with it. If I tell you that you should get the Seamaster, but in the back of your mind you want the Submariner, you're not going to be happy long term and you're going to end up getting out of that Seamaster. So I'd rather you be happy. Always buy what you like more. That's always how this question is answered and should be answered, in my opinion. Next, which do you recommend? Okay, so this question is a little bit different. It's very similar to the last question, though usually it's just, hey, I'm looking for a watch. Which watch do you recommend? Well, once again, my personal taste, I might rather have a 16550 instead of a 16570 for the subtle differences, making a little bit more vintage or vintage seeming and vintage in appearance. And so the list goes on and on and on. So if I had to recommend a watch, that is so difficult to do. Sure, some questions could be asked, oh, you know, what are you going to do with your watch? But even that doesn't really matter, right? So if I ask them, oh, what do you do? Okay, you're not a diver, so then you don't need a dive watch. I mean, that cancels out almost everyone that owns a dive watch, except for a tiny pool of divers, which tend to use diving computers anyway. And if not, maybe they want a dive watch for nostalgic reasons or a backup or traditional reasons, more so than actual utility value. So once again, buy what you love. That question comes up all of the time. How many owners has this watch had? So when you're trading in pre-owned watches and you have a pre-owned watch website or a pre-owned watch company, people want to know where the watches have been, and they'll ask you, and people will ask, and collectors will ask. And you know, I remember even when I started collecting watches, I was probably guilty of this one as well, because you kind of just relate this to cars in a roundabout way, right? People are familiar with shopping for cars. You want to look up the Carfax, you want to see the number of owners. But the thing is, it's just really difficult to know the number of owners. Almost impossible in almost every circumstance. Occasionally you get a very rare watch, a watch with provenance, a watch that has only gone through prestigious auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, so on and so forth. But typically you're getting watches that maybe someone bought it for a graduation present. Maybe someone just bought it and they liked it, then they decided to flip it, and you don't really know. So sometimes you'll see people say, oh, this is a one owner watch, and they're on the forums and you see a listing for it on the forums, but you know, and I know that, you know, is it one owner? Is it two owners? I don't think that really makes a difference. Typically, I like to recommend look at the quality of the watch, look at it in terms of how the case construction has held up. Is there a lot of deep dents and dings and scratches? And in my opinion, that's way more important, because imagine someone buys the watch, they baby it, compared to let's say 5 people have touched that watch and they all babied it, they put it in the safe, they all wanted it to be an heirloom piece someday, but they didn't, compared to one guy that wore his watch diving, right? Even diving for a couple of weeks with that watch is going to be in much worse condition than the watch that was always kept in a safe, even though there were 5 owners. So that question, receive that one all the time. Has this watch been polished? Now, I've talked about this before in the past, and others have talked about this before in the past, but asking if a watch has been polished and it's pre-owned usually means the watch has been polished. Now, let me explain this one. When someone has a watch that's truly unpolished, they let you know, especially a dealer. They want you to know it's unpolished. And after you've touched so many watches and you've held so many watches that you know are unpolished just based on things like the angling and the angling of the metal in the cases, what we call chamfers, you know what probably is an unpolished watch or an unworn watch. Now, the watch could be unworn and unpolished, or it could be unworn and polished. It just depends. But you can look at the case, and if you have enough experience and you're a dealer or a collector long term, you know if it's been polished by looking at the watch. And so we get a lot of questions from people that want to know if the watch has been polished. Generally, watches have been polished. Now then the question goes, has it been polished once or twice or 3 times? Really difficult to tell, and you're just kind of guessing. You know, there's no real telltale signs besides if it's over polished, and that's how we handle it, and a lot of others that trade pre-owned watches handle it, is the watch over polished? Now, we'll let you know if the watch is unpolished, and these are barn find type scenarios, or they're unworn or unsold in other brands when we're not talking about Rolex. Usually this question comes up when we're talking about Rolex, but more so in other brands as time goes on. But what you see is over-polished watches, and that's when a lot of the case construction is missing. A lot of the metal is removed from the watch, and when you polish watches, that's exactly what you're doing, is you're removing the top layers of metal, and that's why it looks so much better, because the bottom layers have not been exposed to the damage, the dings, the dents, the scratches. And then you can use different brushes, you know, on a polishing wheel. Basically, it's basically a drill that spins around and they move the metal back and forth, and that's what they use to take off the metal. And so when that happens, someone that touches the watch that doesn't really have a great skill set at doing that, sometimes you'll have a watchmaker get into polishing that doesn't necessarily do polishing. For example, we have a polisher that does just polishing, and he is able to take fine amounts off so that it doesn't get over polished. But sometimes, especially when you get out there into the world, you get into some pawn shops and some jewelry stores that maybe don't really do too many watches but enough to be dangerous. That's when you see a lot of over polishing, and you get them that'll take like an 18 karat Rolex watch and they'll just rip off so much gold, because gold is just a softer metal, and so everyone takes it to get polished and they just rip off the top layer. So is it polished? Yes, probably, but if it's not, we will be sure to tell you, because we want to be proud of that, right? If you have an unpolished watch, people are proud of that, including dealers. Does the watch work well? Yes. For us, I can tell you that every watch works well, and if a watch dealer is reputable, they're not going to sell you a watch that does not work well. Now, occasionally you'll see some things out there in the world slip through the cracks, but it could have been something that happened in shipping, or it may not have been as big of a deal as a review may have said out there in the world. Now, that being said, if you're shopping on places like eBay, like Chrono24, like watch forums, where, you know, people maybe trade one watch a year, if that, or it's a personal watch and they don't really have the experience, they don't know that a watch needs to be maintained and that there's upkeep that is involved with luxury watches, that's when you really need to ask, does the watch work? I don't know of a single dealer, large or small, that is willing to put everything as far as their reputation on the line to sell a watch that doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense from a dealer's perspective. Generally speaking, most dealers out there want to do a good job. Next, where do you get watches? Now, I'll tell you, and I've told you in other videos, I have no problem sharing this, but we get watches from a few different sources. We get watches from other dealers, we get watches from collectors like you when you want to trade up or trade into something, switch up your collection a little bit, and we also get watches from traditional sources on occasion, less so as time goes on, but we'll get watches from eBay, Chrono24 sometimes, and we'll put them through our rigorous testing as well with our watchmakers. And this is pretty rare nowadays for us to find a watch on eBay or Chrono24, but occasionally something pops up. You know, one of us at the office or the team is bored and we see something, oh, that would be nice, let's take a risk on that. And then we put it through watchmaking, and if it checks out good, we'll love to stock it. And if not, you know, there's other issues and things to look at. And so generally speaking, watches are coming from collectors and other dealers. We specialize in watches that are, I don't want to say off-brand, but less popular, right? The watches that deliver a lot of great value, like GP, like JLC, watches where a collector can get into them at a fraction of the retail price point, have a great time, and have a quality watch that is up there with sometimes any of the Holy Trinity brands. And so that's what we specialize in. So we'll have dealers from all over the world call us when they get something in, and that's how we source watches. And if you want to know all of the other places we source watches, as well as how you can source watches, and as well use the tips and tricks that we use on Chrono24, on eBay, on all of those places like the forums to get great deals, I actually have a course that I made because I was getting asked this question so many times. So there's a course, link in the description below, and you can go and you can learn exactly how we built Del Rey Watch, how to trade, buy, and sell watches. And if you have the free time, that's something to get into. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity once all of this pandemic blows over in the watch industry, and a lot of watches are already starting to be trading hands as we speak. So if you're interested, check that out, link in the description below. Next, how much will it be worth in the future? So how much will this particular watch be worth in the future? Now, this is always a difficult question to answer because no one has a crystal ball and no one can really be sure, right? 4 months ago, someone could have asked us, how much is this ceramic Submariner date from 3 years ago going to be worth a year from now? Most people would have said, yeah, this watch is probably going to be worth 5 to 6% more if you wanted to trade it on the open market, because that's what was happening. That was the historical data for ceramic sports models from Rolex. That's just what was going on. Stainless steel subs were in such high demand, and there's still demand there for them, but you know, be assured that these watches are trading much lower than they were today than they were back then. Will those watches go up in the future again? Who knows, right? Rolex could cut production further, or they might start shooting watches out more. I have opinions on this. Other watch dealers have opinions on this as well. But to guarantee how much a watch is going to be worth in the future, that's a difficult question. And generally speaking, always shy away from suggesting or even kind of talking about watches as an investment. It's interesting to kind of speculate and play around. Even myself, it's interesting, right? Oh, is this watch going to be worth more? Is this watch going to be less? But when you're talking about actually giving professional advice like that as a watch dealer, as someone that trades thousands of watches and really studies the market, that's just not something I do. That's not something anyone here at Del Rey Watch does. And very few dealers that are reputable are going to be willing to say, yes, this watch is going to be worth 25% more 5 years from now. You might get an opinion. I talk about different opinions on what I think might happen in the future, but to guarantee 100%, that's difficult. And when you're working in a customer relationship like that, unless you can guarantee it or at least let them know that you're just giving an opinion, it's just not something to do. And so in short, watches are part of a hobby, right? We all enjoy watches for different reasons. Always do not recommend to look at watches as investments, but more as a hobby, something we all enjoy, love, and have a passion for. That's what I always recommend, and I think it's probably the best answer for that one. Now, this question I do get asked a fair amount, and it is, I'm thinking of buying a watch X months from now, and then usually there's a story afterwards. So let me explain this one further as well. Usually we'll get an email, it'll say, I'm thinking of buying a watch 8 months from now. What do you think about the prices of this 8 months from now? What do you think about the watches that are going to be available 8 months from now? Once again, there's no crystal ball. Now, it's really exciting that you've been able to save and, you know, looking forward to it. Even with my personal collection, I kind of, put things out there and, have things on my hot list that I'm looking to add to my collection, my short list, and, out in the future, because you don't know when they're going to spring up. So even for myself, I like to kind of plan, and not only watches, but everything else as well. Just I'm a planning kind of person. And so I can really relate to that, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. But 8 months from now, the watch market is going to be totally different. Probably, maybe not, but you have to assume, right? And so when someone says they want to know the price of a watch, can we start looking for it? The watches, they move around in this industry so quickly. Whatever is available today probably is not going to be available the same condition, the quality, the provenance, the box of papers, all of that. So always suggest that it's good to have a general idea of what it's going to cost, but wait till it gets about a month out or sooner, and that's when you can really determine exactly what you're going to have to pay for something, exactly what's available, and get a better idea. But when we start talking months out, it becomes so difficult to forecast. And if you're looking for a sub, something like that, no problem, but you have a very specific reference for an Omega Seamaster that's been out there, or some other brand, or Girard-Perregaux, a JLC, where there's not a lot floating around compared to a ceramic sub, it's really difficult to tell you then. So if you're looking for a watch out in the future, great, excellent. I love the planning, but it's always really great idea to kind of wait till the day comes closer and to get a better idea then. And it's just a safer, and you'll get more peace of mind knowing that what you're actually being quoted will be available. And lastly, the birth year watches. Now, birth year watches, there are differing opinions on these in the watch community. Now, most dealers don't touch birth year watches. It's very difficult. Now, I know it's exciting to get a birth year watch. I think it's a great idea. I've done it one time with a Datejust a long time ago in my earlier collecting history. But in recent times, it's become a bit of a difficult thing for a lot of dealers because of the way watches have kind of turned into a commodity, especially Rolex, where prices are pretty much the same, give or take a few years. Watches are kind of just treated at the dealer level as a bit of a commodity, much like any business. There are some exceptions, but when someone's looking for a birth year watch, it can be really difficult to hunt that watch down. I mean, have any of you guys out there looked for a birth year Rolex? I mean, even talking about watches outside of Rolex, setting aside Rolex and Omega, or certain Omega, it's really difficult to determine the actual specific year of the watch. And even if you're looking for the manufacturer year of the watch, that might cover you for some of the Omega, and certainly all of Rolex for the most part up until 2012 when they started scrambling the serial numbers. But when we talk about production years of all the other watches, if the watch doesn't have box and papers, you really don't know. You can guess based on when that model was out, but you're not going to know the production year. And even if that watch does have papers, warranty papers, the papers are going to have the date at which the watch was sold, and sometimes the watches sit in the shelf for a few years. And so, we'll get some questions about people that want birth year watches, and when we can find them, great, love to help. I think that's actually a pretty cool thing to have in the collection, but I will tell you it's extremely difficult, and I'm not shy to the fact to also tell people that it's extremely difficult. And also, when you do look for a birth year watch, to give you an example, if we're looking for a birth year Rolex, forget all the other brands. It's extremely difficult to find, let's say, a birth year Zenith. I mean, it's 1 in a million chance to be able to find the paperwork, and you're really looking for birth year paperwork at that point instead of a birth year watch. When we talk about birth year Rolex, if we go out and we start talking to other dealers and our networks of collectors and those that are distributing watches wholesale, and we're looking for a birth year watch, they're also going to charge a premium for it. Unfortunately, we're not. We're just going to treat it like any other deal, because we do treat all deals the same, and we want to do the best for everyone. But when we go out there and find the watch from a dealer or distributor and we ask, oh, is that a 1986? Well, they know we're looking for a birth year watch, and they know that a customer is going to be willing to pay more for it. So it's the unfortunate truth when we come to it, and I think the same could be said in most industries. And so generally speaking, I think it's great if someone wants to find a birth year watch, but probably it's always best to tackle that one on your own and look on the forums, look on Chrono24, look for the serial number, and I think it can be probably done a little bit better than going through a series of dealers, because the watches that someone knows out there might be willing to be paid more for, they might actually try to get it. And so that's generally why I turn people away, once again, from birth year watches, unless they absolutely have to have it, and in which case I'll recommend a bunch of great sources that they can use to find it. And part of the hunt, part of the thrill of this is the hunt, right? The birth year hunt. I know a lot of people get a thrill out of that, and I know some people that are probably laughing a little bit about this, but I want to hear what you have to say. Do you think that birth year watches are something that you'd love to have in your collection, or do you have any? Is it a coincidence? Did you have to hunt for it? Did you have to find it? And was it enjoyable for you? I would love to hear this. Please leave this in the comments below, as well as do you have any other ideas for videos that I can be doing here during this quarantine? I would love to mix it up a little bit and give you exactly what you want to see and hear. Everybody be well, and we'll see you next time. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.